This happened over 100 years ago, but somehow, it still doesn't sit right with me. It was the fall of 1922 in New Brunswick, New Jersey. A quiet town back then, mostly middle-class families, close-knit church groups, and a sense that nothing bad ever really happened there. But on September 16th, everything changed. That morning, a group of kids were walking near an old crabapple tree just off Easton Avenue. It was the kind of place you'd pass without thinking, a patch of overgrown weeds, a few scattered trees, but that morning, something caught their attention. Two bodies laid out side by side, almost too carefully. Reverend Edward Wheeler Hall and choir singer Eleanor Mills. They weren't just murdered. They were displayed. Eleanor's throat had been slit so deeply she was nearly decapitated. Reverend Hall had a single gunshot wound to the head. The dirt beneath them was soaked in blood, but their bodies, almost clean. Arranged as if someone wanted them found a certain way. Next to Eleanor's body were torn-up love letters. Some signed by Reverend Hall. Her hat was pulled over her face. A scarf was tied around her neck, as if someone tried to give her back some dignity after what they'd done. And maybe that's what made it even more disturbing. Because this wasn't some random act of violence. This was planned. Deliberate. Intimate. Reverend Hall was married. His wife, Frances, came from one of the wealthiest families in the area. Old money. Eleanor Mills, on the other hand, was a working-class woman, married, too, to the church's janitor. Everyone in the congregation knew they were close. People had whispered about it. But no one ever imagined it would lead to murder. The investigation was chaotic from the start. Reporters flooded the scene. Locals trampled through the area, taking souvenirs. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. And through it all, the Hall family remained strangely calm. Frances Hall didn't flinch. Not once. Eventually, 2 years after the murders, she and her 2 brothers were arrested. Charged with the crime. The trial was massive, one of the most talked about in the country at the time. But they were acquitted. Lack of evidence, they said. No one could place them at the scene. No murder weapon. No motive strong enough to hold. And just like that, it was over. The bodies were buried. The newspapers moved on. But the people of New Brunswick didn't forget. Some say the town was cursed after that. That there were shadows that moved in the church basement late at night. That Eleanor's voice could still be heard faintly on Sunday mornings, humming a hymn no one had sung in years. Others believe it wasn't just a murder, it was a warning. A message that some people were simply too powerful to touch. To this day, the case remains officially unsolved. No one knows who killed Reverend Hall and Eleanor Mills. But someone out there does. And maybe, they've always known. This happened a few years after I enlisted in the military. Back when I was still young enough to think everyone working for the government was one of the good guys. I was stationed in D.C. at the time and worked adjacent to the Defense Intelligence Agency. I wasn't high level or anything like that, but my job gave me enough clearance to move through some of the buildings and interact with analysts. I remember seeing Anna Montes more than once. She always had this calm, composed demeanor, nothing could rattle her. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but she always had answers when someone needed them. No one suspected her of anything. That's what still blows my mind. Anna had been working at the DIA since the mid-80s. Her focus was on Latin America, and more specifically, Cuba. She was considered an expert. People trusted her. If she wrote a report, it got read. If she made a recommendation, people followed it. She had a way of making herself essential. But what none of us knew, what not a single person around her could have guessed, was that she had been spying for Cuba for nearly 2 decades. From 1985 to 2001. She was feeding classified information directly to Havana. I remember the day it all broke. It was just after September 11th. Everyone was still in shock, operating in overdrive, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when Anna got arrested. Quietly. No news coverage, no perp walk. Just, vanished. People in the office started whispering. First it was a rumor, then someone said, counterintelligence, and that's when I started piecing it together. They kept it out of the headlines at first. Probably because we couldn't afford to let the world know that a high-ranking analyst, someone who helped shape U.S. policy on Cuba, had been working for the enemy for 16 years. And here's the part that chills me. She didn't do it for money. She wasn't paid. There were no offshore bank accounts, no secret mansions in the Caribbean. Anna did it because she believed in the Cuban government. She believed in their ideology. She thought the U.S. was wrong to treat Cuba as the enemy. And she saw it as her moral obligation to level the playing field. Think about that. A woman who rose through the ranks in U.S. intelligence, who had friends, co-workers, who probably shook hands with people making decisions about war and peace, was secretly working to undermine them the whole time. They say she memorized classified documents and typed up the details on her home computer. That she used shortwave radios and coded messages. She even met Cuban handlers in foreign countries. It sounds like a spy novel, but it was real. She was right there in front of us the whole time. I'll never forget what someone in my unit said when the truth came out. He told me, the scariest thing about betrayal is that it always comes from someone you trust. Ana Montes was sentenced to 25 years in prison. She served most of it and was released in early 2023. She's free now. Living somewhere quiet, I imagine. No one really talks about her anymore. But to me, she's proof that the most dangerous threats aren't always the loud ones. Sometimes they smile at you. Sometimes they wear a badge. And sometimes they sit 2 desks over. Listening, waiting. This happened in a quiet suburb in Bedfordshire. The kind of place you wouldn't expect a body to be hidden inside a garden shed for months. It was a neighborhood of modest houses, trimmed hedges, and the occasional barking dog behind a wooden fence. Nobody there thought twice when an elderly woman who lived alone stopped answering the door. Her name was Madeline White. She was 74. She'd been renting out a room in her house to a man named Scott Paterson. From what neighbors said, he seemed normal enough. A little quiet. Kept to himself. But always polite. If you'd asked anyone back then what they thought of him, they probably would have said the same thing, he seemed like a decent tenant. What they didn't know was that sometime in the early weeks of 2023, he killed her inside her own home. Dismembered her. And hid parts of her body in a makeshift grave behind the garden shed. No one noticed anything was wrong at first. Because Paterson made sure they wouldn't. He used Madeline's email account to respond to inquiries from friends and relatives. He wrote birthday cards under her name. Even answered messages, pretending she had simply grown tired of the outside world. He'd tell people she wasn't well. That she didn't want visitors. That she was moving away soon. And somehow, unbelievably, it worked. 4 months. Neighbors said the garden started to smell strange when summer came. But even then, nobody thought the worst. They thought it was just old trash. Or maybe a dead animal buried nearby. What's worse is that Paterson kept living in her house the entire time. Sleeping under the same roof as the woman he murdered. The police only discovered what happened because someone from Madeline's family grew suspicious and called it in. When officers arrived to check on her, Paterson gave them excuses. He said she'd left. That she didn't want to be bothered. But something felt off. And when the officers searched the property, they found the remains buried and covered in a shallow grave, wrapped in plastic, beneath the overgrown edge of the garden. When they took him in, He didn't confess right away. He didn't cry, or lash out, or show remorse. He just sat there, silent, staring. During the investigation they found his digital trail. Evidence of him pretending to be her. Emails, documents, even an online order made in her name. He'd gone to great lengths to keep the lie going. And for almost a year. He got away with it. They called him the Butcher of Suburbia, not because of the crime itself, but because of how normal everything looked from the outside. He was convicted in April 2024. Life sentence. Minimum term of 34 years. He'll be an old man if he ever walks free again. But the part that gets to me the most isn't the murder. It's how long no one knew. How easy it was for him to vanish someone right in the middle of a quiet, normal street. We think monsters live far away. We think we'd notice them. But they're often the quiet ones. The ones who smile. Hold the door open. Nod politely. And go back inside to silence.